Hello and welcome back to the Summer Day Studios YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at how you can use the Toon shader built into Arnold for Maya. This is great if you want to create a cartoony, kind of stylized looking character. And the way the shader works is you could create anything from like kind of a flat sort of Ghibli or anime style shading to something that has a little bit more gradient to it. So let's get right into it. I've got this little robot character here. You can really use this for anything, if be it a character or a vehicle or an environment as well. But for the time being, I'm just going to go ahead, select this whole guy. I've got a background here as well that I'm not going to use that for the time being. Hold down right click, go to assign new material, Arnold, and then this one here, AI Toon. A lot of people have asked recently if AI stands for artificial intelligence, like ChatGPT and that sort of thing with this. It's not, just to clarify. AI, I think, is just what the guys at Arnold and Autodesk use to denote that it's an Arnold material. It's got nothing to do with AI in that sense. Okay, so that's now being applied. And obviously, if we went ahead and rendered in our viewport here, you'll see that we can't actually see anything because we don't have a light in here right now. Normally, we'd go to Arnold and we'd create maybe a area light or a sky dome light I like to use, but I've found that the Toon shader generally works best if we come to the rendering tab and create a directional light. Good old-fashioned directional light, which is kind of like a sunlight, if you like. Comes from sort of an infinite distance away. And no matter how you scale it, or it doesn't really or position it, it doesn't really change the properties of the light. It's just a rotation. It has more of an effect. So if I add that light into the scene and let that render for a second, you can see here we're getting just some very, very basic shadows and some light on our model, but we're not really seeing anything that's looking particularly cartoony right now. I'm just going to adjust these light settings real quick, just to what I like to use for the standard, and for the exposure I'm going to set up to 1 as well, just to give us a bit more light in the scene. Okay, so I'll go ahead and pause that render for the time being, and I'm going to open up the Hypershade editor, and I'm going to select our new AI Toon from up here, and then just press this button to graph the material so we can see it. And if you're used to looking at the like an AI OpenPBR surface, you realize this AI Toon has a lot less inputs. It does actually, if you click it, have quite a few inputs on it, but you just, by default, you don't really see that many. So you have to click on the material to see a lot of things here. And there's quite a lot going on here. We've got something to do with edge, which is that kind of effect that you get in like drawn media as well, like physical drawn media, digital drawn media, like 2D media, or cartoons, where you've got kind of a black edge, like a comic book edge around things. And we can get into that in a minute. That looks really cool. Silhouette as well, we'll get into that, and base, which is going to be the color, and specular, which you're probably already familiar with, right? The kind of shininess, the roughness of the material. So for the time being, we'll just go with the base. And we can change the color of this. But the most important input, really, to give us that cartoony look here is the tone map input, okay? And without exactly explaining what that does, I'm going to go ahead and create a ramp RGB, a ramp texture, sorry. Just a simple Maya ramp texture. And I'm going to select our material, hold down middle mouse on this ramp, and then drag this over into the tone map, okay? And I'm going to click this, and I'm just going to click this little button here, and that's going to open up this window where we can see our gradient, our ramp. Okay, and that's essentially what this is, just a gradient. And then we're going to go ahead and click render again. And for the time being, you're not going to see any difference, really. It's going to look just as it did, like default Maya lighting. So under interpolation here, I'm going to change that from linear to none, and that's then going to make this whole bar go black. And now you're going to see our entire model is going to go black. If I just pull this white bar back to around the middle of the gradient, you're going to see we're going to start getting some very, very stark lighting and shading here. And this is the basis of our cartoon shader. Right, if you think whenever you look at Ghibli is a perfect example of this, the shading is very, very, at least on the characters, is quite flat and not in a negative way at all. It's just a style where you kind of really have one main color for perhaps the skin, and then one color for the shadow, just a slightly darker area. So you can see here by adjusting this, it adjusts the intensity of the shadow, how much of that shadow shows up on the model. If I was to set this all the way back to Here you see we're getting very, very little shadow. This looks very, very stark. If we put it somewhere in the middle, we're getting kind of more of a middle ground. And then we can even go ahead and adjust the light. And you can see here that the shadow and light is reacting how you'd expect. But the gradient here, the ramp, being plugged into the tone map is affecting quite a lot of how the shadow works. So once you get used to this, you can really change the look of your Toon shader quite a lot. And we can go a step further than this. You know, we don't just have to have one point. We can add an extra point maybe in the middle here. If we wanted this to be a bit more, have a few more steps to it right now, because you think there's just one step, right? We've got white and black. Okay, I guess 2 steps really. If you want 3 steps, maybe we change this color to sort of mid-gray. You can see now we're getting 3 steps. Okay, we've got this white kind of hot highlight, then we've got the gray, and then the black. And then you could even get even more granular than this. We could add another point here, and then do like slightly more gray, another point here, and then do a little bit in between there and pure white. And you can see you can get very, very granular with this, depending on the kind of style that you want to go with. But the great thing about this is it just allows you to control those shadows. I'm quite fond of just 3 points, personally, depending on what I'm trying to do. So I might go ahead and just delete one of these and put this one in the middle. Also just 1 point or 2 points works pretty well too. But for the time being, we'll leave it like that. So if we come back to the Hypershade editor, just select our AI Toon. We can also change the base color. Maybe I'll turn this to something a bit more blue, kind of like this. Okay, you can also plug a file in here. There is an input. If you were to click this, you can go ahead and select a file. So you can plug texture maps into here as well. If you have hand-painted textures, and that can often look really, really nice as well. Let's say if you're doing kind of like a stylized cartoon humanoid type character and you've got some hand-painted skin textures, you can absolutely go ahead and plug that in there. We could even plug in a ramp into the color, for example, or noise. You know, the workflow that you'd normally have for any of your color diffuse works exactly the same way with the Toon shader. You just have that extra power of the tone map as well. I might make this a little bit brighter. By default, the weight of the base is going to be set at 0.8, so it might look a little bit more subdued than normal. So you could increase that to 1, but generally I don't really touch this too much. Next, specular is similar, but obviously it works a little bit differently because this is very, very stylized looking. So if I was to go ahead and turn the specular all the way up to 1, just let that render update, you can see it looks very, very strange, like almost like we're getting this perfect like stylized metallic look, which looks really cool if that's what you're going for, but it's a little bit too much for this. So I might go to something like 0.2. And we can also adjust the roughness of this. The roughness is generally going to make the shininess, the white parts a bit, you can see here, we're getting more of that whiteness on the model. And without plugging in a tone map, this kind of just looks very metallic, which it might be a look that you're going for. But if you want the specular to have a similar shading to the way the shadows do, we can either create a brand new ramp. We could just duplicate it, or what I often like to do is just use the same ramp for everything, because I like the kind of shading to be consistent, and plug that into the specular tone map. Now if I minimize this and come back, you can see now we're getting that same kind of stylized highlight on the specular too, in the form of these big blobs. And you can see we're getting the 3 steps, so the base color, kind of the mid-tone, and then the highlight as well. Another cool thing we can do is add something called rim lighting, which is essentially just lighting around the rim of your model, or the kind of silhouette if you like. So if I was to click under rim lighting here and increase the color from black, we'll put it all the way up to white, you can see that's going to make our model have this kind of weird sickly sort of glow. But I can go ahead and take our directional light and plug that into the light here, just to give that a little bit more information to go off of. And then if I were to sort of gradually reduce the width here from 1 down to something like maybe 0.1, you can see now we're getting a kind of slightly more pleasing, just nice like rim highlight here to separate this guy from the background. You don't necessarily have to use this as well. This is just another feature within this. If you don't want this at all, you can just completely turn that off. Just make sure you change the color to black. Okay, next, what if we want to add that kind of nice black outline to everything? There's a step that we actually have to do in the render settings before we can do that. I'm going to click this little button up here with the cog icon, come to Arnold Renderer, and then underneath Filter, the default will be Gaussian, but you want to change this to Contour. And now with that turned on, the render's going to update, and we're probably going to see some black outlines and everything. Here you go. So it's now giving us this very, very like stylized black outline along a lot of the edges, and it's looking quite kind of Ghibli-esque. It's important to note as well with the contour filter, specifically in the Arnold renderer, you cannot use GPU rendering as far as I know right now. It has to be CPU rendering, which is a little bit annoying, but just a little caveat for if you wanted to use that. If we go ahead and select our material, we can also adjust the edge as well. So by default, the angle threshold is set to 180 degrees. But if I was to reduce this down to something like 45, that means it's going to look for anything that's over a 45-degree angle, and then it's going to apply that edge to it. So we should, in theory, get a lot more visible edges on things as opposed to if we just left it at 180, right? So you can see we're getting a bit more around the knee joints, and perhaps the side of the head as well. If I was to reduce this even further down to something like 25, we might start to get even more, but it's really going to depend on your model. So yeah, you can see here now we're getting it on the arm as well, going up this groove. So it kind of depends how many of those lines you would like to have. So you play around with the angle threshold. The only other thing I would say, since we're using a directional light, the shadows can be a little harsh. So if you want the shadows to be a little less dark, right, you can see here we're getting these very like severe pitch black shadows underneath the torso. If I was to select the AI Toon shader and come back to the base tone map, just select that here. The color of this in the ramp is actually defining how harsh the shadow is, right? So if I change the selected color from black, maybe to something a little bit more gray, something like this. You wouldn't want this to be brighter than this color, right? Because it needs to be in a sequence. But you can see now that that shadow underneath there has got a little bit lighter. So the kind of depth and the harshness of your shadows is going to be all adjusted from your ramp being plugged into your tone maps. And that's the biggest takeaway from this, really, is that tone maps with the Toon shader are everything. And then your texture, diffuse maps, color maps, that's you can still control as you normally would. You might just paint it up in a more stylized way, for example. And you can mix in Toon shaders with regular Arnold materials as well, standard surfaces as you want, particularly for eyes. I could go ahead and add like a standard surface shader for the eyes and add some emission to that to give it some glow, although you can add emission to a Toon shader as well. But yeah, I hope that's been helpful. That's just a quick look at the Toon shader in Maya. If you'd like me to do a deeper dive into it, please do let me know. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions at all, please do let me know in the comments. And yeah, like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.